So this is the near the upper boundary of the Yurok Reservation where I live. Our reservation extends a mile on each side of the river. This is the confluence of the Klamath and Trinity rivers, and our reservation goes clear down to the mouth of the river, which is approximately 32 miles. Our ancestral territory, or the territory that we once utilized for various reasons, hunting, fairgrounds, things like that, is much bigger than the reservation. It's about 500,000 acres. And so these are the lands that were entrusted to us by Creator to inhabit and to take care of in a healthy way. In the beginning times, there were spirit beings who inhabited this area and made it the way that we see today. The things in the landscape were once in spirit form that took physical form. And in the beginning times, we had an agreement with those spirit beings that we would take care of each other and keep each other healthy. And so that agreement comes down to this time today, that it is our responsibility as humans to care for the land. And we no longer own all the land. We share this land with non-native brothers and sisters. And so that responsibility has expanded out to include all of those who either own land or have responsibility over it, such as government agencies like the Forest Service and Park Service, as well as private landowners. In those beginning times, we were given fire as a tool to care for the land. And we have known for thousands and thousands and thousands of years that this is a tool that is very effective. It keeps the land healthy physically and spiritually. It's only been in recent years that government agencies have come to realize the importance of fire on the land. And that has come to people's attention because of the catastrophic wildfires that we have been having. Because of the wildfires that government agencies and the general public are realizing that it was a grave mistake to exclude fire from the landscape. That fire is meant to be a natural part of the ecosystem, and without it, the ecosystem becomes very out of balance. One of the large contributors to the wildfires that we have been seeing is that there is so much vegetation growing on the land and so much down and dead vegetation as well. So when a fire starts, it has all that fuel to feed it and feed it and feed it. And so it just continues to get bigger and wilder and more intense. 100+ years ago, we didn't have big wildfires like this because we constantly used fire across the landscape, from the high country to the seaside, the ocean sides. We didn't burn it all at once, but we burned different places at different times of the year for different reasons. So for example, in our 500,000 acres of land that's the Yurok ancestral territory, it was about 50% prairie. And there were large herds of elk that lived here. Now the prairies are 1% of what they once were. And we no longer have elk in our homelands because fire was outlawed. The conifers were allowed to encroach on the prairies. We used to burn prairies like almost every year, different places, and it would keep that encroachment back. Also, the single species agriculture, the timber industry, so all they want is that money that comes from the timber, from the resources. And so they paid people to plant fir trees every place, including the prairies. And so what we have now is large plantations of same age trees where they previously logged, so that when a fire comes through and it goes through the brush that's on the ground, gets up into the tops of the trees, and those trees are all the same age, they're all the same height. And so fire just roars through the tops of the trees and they can't stop it. So here is where the Klamath River goes into the ocean. So we would burn clear from down here right by the ocean, and this area was all grass. We would burn that clear up to the very high mountain tops. And what we're doing today is, back then they just called it taking care of the land. Now we call it cultural burning, but really it's managing the land for living culture. And when you are using fire to take care of the land and the plants and animals that live there, it is wildfire protection is a byproduct of that, because when you are burning regularly small and large pieces of land, it keeps all that dead fuel is not there, all that excess vegetation is not growing, and so there's not as much fuel to feed a fire when it starts. So we use fire to produce healthy food sources. You'll see on the right-hand side my cute little grandson, and he is sitting in baskets and baskets of acorns, which was at one time a staple food for our people. And we are starting to eat those more and more and more. And the thing about acorns is that if you don't burn under the tan oak trees, then the acorns will become infested with weevils. And so we need to burn under those tan oaks. We burn in the fall time. And if you burn at night, the insects that lay that larva, they'll fly down, those moths, they'll fly down into the fire. And so then it gives them a double whammy. So not only is the larva killed, but the moths that produce it is also killed. It also keeps the canopy open, so the fire will kill those smaller new trees, and so that it doesn't become just a forest of tall, skinny trees with not good root systems. It's well spaced out trees that have nice root systems and produce lots of big acorns. And underneath those acorns are the huckleberries. And because those trees are spaced out, sun is able to come through and reach the huckleberries. And because there's not so much trees all crowded together, they all have plenty of water, which is one of the things that we're facing with climate change, is that with the drought, people are worried about water. And in fact, they're even talking about bringing plant species in, trees, and planting them in places that they never even traditionally grew. And I think that's a huge mistake. They said, well, these aren't going to survive the drought. You know, how do they know that it won't survive the drought? If we go back to traditional land management, these native plant species have seen drought before, and they'll make it. We need to give them that chance. We need to continue putting fire on the land in a purposeful way, in a controlled manner, to get rid of all of the excess vegetation so that what's left is healthy it gets plenty of sun, it gets enough water from the water that's provided, and it's not all crowded out, and it's not at risk of wildfire as much. It's much more fire resilient. Traditionally, the hunters would burn the high country, their hunting areas. So as they were coming down off the mountain, when they see certain cues from the environment, they would tell them that this place is ready to be burned. Now, also paying attention to the weather, you can smell when rain's coming, you can feel it as well. And so you look at a place, you see it's ready to burn, you know that rain is coming in, and they could light the mountain behind them as they walk down off the hill. Today, all the places that we burned, we see deer come back. It's such an exciting thing because they have good habitat. They have a nice place that's open where they can move around. And after a burn, and all of that ash gets into the soil and makes it all healthy, and the plants come back all nutritious. Those deer, they want to come in there, and that's where they want to raise their babies. And we see deer all the time now. There was a time 10 years ago before we started burning when we seldom saw deer, but they are returning. On the top left, you'll see a young man pulling a salmon out of a net, and you might wonder what that has to do with fire. And there is a very close connection between fire and water. Fire increases the quality and the quantity of water. So when we look up the hill and we see brush so thick that you can't even see through it, let alone walk through it. The only thing that can live there is like little bunny rats and wood rats because the brush is so thick. And you think of all of those plants sucking up all that water, and those places that used to be moist, wet creeks, suddenly they're drying up. And our materials that we rely on for basketries, the different ferns, they're starting to disappear because there's not enough water. But after we burn that hillside, that watershed, suddenly we see water in the ditch at the end of summer, unheard of before we started burning. So the fire not only increases the amount of water that's reaching the creeks, which is then reaching the river, which is providing a good place for salmon. It also increases the quality of it. So if you stop and you think about what is in our water filters that we're filtering our water with in our sinks and other kinds of containers, it's charcoal. And so when we're burning larger landscapes and watersheds, we're leaving charcoal all over the ground. And so all of that water is being filtered through charcoal. Another one of the purposes for our burning a long time ago and now is to make sure that our medicine plants are healthy and easily available. I have several different kinds of medicine plants here. Up on the right, we have madrone, and that's the bark of that is good for diabetes. Down below that, we have willow, and willow is a natural form of aspirin, the bark. We also use the willow roots to make baskets. And then here next to that willow is a giant pepperwood. And oh man, pepperwood just thrives on fire. It's like it actually gets kind of too plentiful. But pepperwood, or also known as California Bay, it's a powerful medicine for people with arthritis or rheumatism. It's also really good for poison oak or tummy problems. Lots and lots of different kinds of things can be fixed with pepperwood. And so these are just some of the plants that grow naturally out on the landscapes around us if you know what to look for. And our ancestors knew all of the plants that provided food, all of the plants that provided medicine, and they knew how to take care of them. And again, one of the best ways is with fire, because it takes care of the landscapes in a holistic manner. These are some of the plants and animals that we use in ceremony. In those beginning times when the spirit beings was here, they perfected our ceremonies, how Creator wants us to lift up prayer. And then they taught us how to do that, which animals to use, which plants, how to use them, and how to do those ceremonial dances so that it would we would continue to have a good life in balance with the things around us. Here you'll see a pileated woodpecker, and that's one of the most important animals in our ceremonies, that red on his head. And so, you know, I went for most of my life, probably 30, 40 years without ever seeing a pileated woodpecker. But since we've started burning, we saw 2 in one day. We hear them pecking all around the day after the burn, because when we're burning, those little insects, they come out of the wood, and those woodpeckers, they're just right there to gobble them up. We have the eagle here and the flicker. And then down here we have the porcupine. So there's many different kinds of plants and animals that we use to in ceremony. And again, we're taking care of their habitat. We're taking care of their habitat so that they too will thrive. This here is braided bear grass. It looks like this picture on the right when it's growing. And in order for this to be useful, you have to burn it. Otherwise, it will be really stiff. It'll cut your hands all up. But when you burn it, it'll send up new shoots up from the middle. And those are the ones that we pick, those new shoots in the middle. And we use them in ceremonial dances and in basket caps. I'll just quickly scroll through a few of these pictures here. There's the pileated woodpecker. So this is a jump dance, a world renewal ceremony, and these guys are wearing headdresses. This is a young lady. She's at her coming of age ceremony. Here is one of the main reasons that really came to the fore when we decided that bringing fire back to our homelands was a priority for us. And that's because basket weavers didn't have the materials to weave baskets, and that the frame of our baskets is made with hazel, and hazel has to be burned in order to be rendered useful. And so we seldom saw babies being carried in baby baskets like the one that you see here. And there were no new prayer baskets being made because there was no hazel to make them. And the only cooking pots and eating bowls that we had was those left over from maybe 100 years ago. And so we knew that we had to bring fire back to our land. That is Native people. Our culture is fire dependent. And as non-Native people, your culture is fire dependent too, because if we don't take care of the forests and the water, then the land is going to suffer, and so too will the people. The other reason that fire is a priority for us to bring back to the land is because of the wildfire risk. And we were afraid that should there be a wildfire, our elders might not be able to escape. Fire has been outlawed for over 100 years. We live in a tinderbox. And we said, this is not okay. As Native people, we never gave up our right to use fire. We gave up a lot of things in the agreements to have the reservation, but there's no paper anywhere that says that we gave up our right to use fire. And so we set about learning how to reclaim it without going to jail, because you can't just go out and start a fire. That's considered arson, and you go to prison for that, and prison's not an option. And so we learned about the rules and the regulations that govern the use of fire, and we trained our people how to get qualified according to those rules and regulations. And we have brought fire back to our land, not as much as we'd like, but we're still working on that. And you know, truly, fire does belong in the hands of the people. It was never meant to be only in the hands of government agencies. There's too much land for them to take care of properly. And fire needs to be put back in the hands of the people, so that they need to learn how to use it responsibly, so that we can all step up and do our part in taking care of the land, and we're not just restoring it to a healthy state, but also to prevent wildfire from consuming our homes. This is one of the first burns that we did in a traditional Hazel Gathering area. And you can see the hazel sticks in the foreground. You can see the limbs coming off of them. And when they're like this, we can't use them for basket weaving. We need to have the straight single shoots that come straight up from the ground. And that's what we use for basket making. And that's what it takes to have a nice, any kind of basket, really. You just can't use ones like this. So you can see this low intensity fire slowly walking its way through the forest. I remember just listening to it and feeling so good, because you know that you're doing something that is good for the land, and that restoration of the land means restoration of the people. This is a quote from Tom Wilson. He was a co-founder of the Cultural Fire Management Council. He's no longer with us, but he's the one who had the big vision that we would take care of all of our ancestral territory with fire. He says, fire is about new life. It purifies. And when the spring comes around, grass, birds, everything is real, enjoyable, new and fresh. The deer, elk, and all wildlife come to the burned areas. I know that this is a very different vision of fire than many people think of when they think of fire. They think of out of control, raging wildfires, racing through towns and burning homes and businesses, but it wasn't meant to be that way. Fire is supposed to be used in a healthy way, that is not supposed to be excluded. It's supposed to be respected, and for us to learn how to use it, that its properties are such that it is capable of putting things back into balance entire ecosystems. Prescribed burns reduce the fuel load on the land, which prevents wildfire. When wildfire comes through, it destroys millions and millions and millions of acres of forest that would normally help to keep our climate healthy. and then it just burns it up, and it puts all that smoke into the air, which is really detrimental to the climate as well. And so when we stop and we think that prescribed burns or a wildfire prevention, really we have two choices. We can either choose to have small amounts of smoke with prescribed burns that dissipates in the night, or we can choose to do nothing, not do any burning, to continue to exclude fire, and the wildfires will continue to get bigger and more intense, and we'll continue to be locked in our homes with our air purifiers and all of our windows and doors sealed, because the smoke is so thick and so toxic that it's not safe to be outside. To me, the choice is really, really clear. Let's take restoration. Let's take restoration and purposeful burning, whose byproduct is fire prevention. And you know, for us as Native people, that's a byproduct, but it's okay to just burn just to reduce fuel. That's what the agency people can do. They don't need to know all of these cultural insights and cultural uses of the plants. If they're reducing the fuel, then they are helping the environment. They're purifying the water. They're making the soil more healthy. And they're helping the air be more breathable by reducing the amount of wildfires. So each of us has our place. The CAL FIRE, the Forest Service, you know, that they can burn purely for fuel reduction. As Native people, we burn for cultural purposes. We don't always use traditional methods. In fact, we're not really hardly able to even do that because of the fuel load. And so when we're out there burning for our hazel sticks, or for our habitat for our deer, or our traditional foods, we're out there with our hard hats and our yellow and green Nomax and fire engines and hose lays, burning big pieces of land, because that's the only safe way to do it at this point. The land is so overgrown with fuel that we need to have all those precautions in place so that the fire doesn't escape. We live in really, really steep territory. And so it's pretty challenging to put fire on the land safely, but we've been doing that for about 8 years. We haven't had any escapes, and our land is looking so much better. It's just a drop in the bucket of what we need to do, and we're trying to figure out how to increase the pace and scale just like everybody else does. But already we can see how much better the landscape looks like, and we can see the native plants coming back, the traditional food. Suddenly they can reach the sun, and the water they can get to their roots, and they're just really, really happy, and they're starting to thrive. And it's so encouraging to see, even this short amount of time that we've been burning, the difference that it makes. And then there's the private landowners who own, you know, maybe they own an acre of land, maybe they own 40 acres or 100. And it should be within their right to learn how to use fire in a safe way, and to use it on their lands, to keep their lands healthy, to keep their homes safe. When we first started to reclaim our right to use fire, we joined in with our neighbors, the Hupa and Yurok people, and we decided that we needed a plan to fully reclaim our right to use fire in a more traditional way, that, you know, that we're really happy to be able to just even burn whatever methods that we have to use. And but we would like to get back to traditional burning. And so we outlined a plan of how do we get from where we're at now with burning with qualified firefighters and the Nomex and the fire engines back to a place, excuse me, where when the time is right, when you're in the right place at the right time, that you can just go out and burn. And so this is the plan that we created as a group of how we'll get from here to there. And there are several strategies we identified, you know, what was getting in the way of getting to where we wanted to be, and what strategies can we use to overcome that. So we are in the process of implementing this plan. Now, this plan was created about 3 years ago. And so this is our vision, and look how beautiful that vision is with the river and the elk out there in the nice open prairies, and the berries big and juicy, and we can look up the hill and we can see the skyline, and we can look down the hill and we can see the river. And so that's what we're shooting for. But we decided to go down a dual path, that we live in a very economically depressed area. There's not really very many jobs. And so we want to continue down this path of having people who are paid to work with fire and paid to, you know, reduce the fuel loads. Part of it's cutting it, and part of it is burning, because you can't burn all the time. We have a pretty good winter up here that you can't burn, and plus the policies and laws only allow you to burn certain times. And so we want to afford our young men and women opportunities to work with fire so that they have income. And we also want to afford those people who aren't interested in becoming certified the ability to go out and burn when the time is right. So these are the values that we identified as we began creating our plan. We want traditional fire practitioners, the right to use fire maintained landscapes. Like I said earlier, our culture is fire dependent. And so when we're doing this, it also involves cultural perpetuation, economic security, and then the really big things that there's not really a way to measure. But when we dream big. And so we included physical and spiritual well-being, as well as physical and spiritual balance of the universe. These are some of the threats that we identified as getting in the way of us being able to fully reclaim our right to use fire. It's law, policy, and their interpretations, failure to honor tribal sovereignty, current management / mismanagement, lack of education from a Native perspective, and lack of funding and liability. We came up with several strategies to move our fire practices forward, and one of them is to have a family-led burn program. And we discovered that when we first started writing this plan, I thought it would be like, 20, 25 years down the road before families would be able to safely go out and burn around their homes. But then we realized that if we do the bigger burns and reduce the brush and make it black around a big area, then within that big area, families can safely burn. And so this is some of my family on it was Super Bowl Sunday, and most of the guys were up the hill watching football, and said, hey, this is a perfect day to burn. And so me and my nephew and my sister and my kids and their kids went out, and we were teaching them how to burn. And so when you're burning on a slope, you start at the top of the slope and then you bring the fire down the hill. So here you see these kids on the downhill side, but that's just because they've already started the top of the brush, and that's already black. And so we are building a family burn program, and family burns take place during the time when CAL FIRE doesn't require any permits, usually between the months of sometime in October through the end of April. And we're closing in on to the end of our time, nearing question time. So another strategy is intergenerational transfer of knowledge. And so we work with the school systems to bring knowledge about fire practices, benefits, and safety into the schools. We bring students out on the day of the cultural burns, and this is our fire coordinator, Rick O'Rourke, and they're standing on the fire line, and he's talking to them about how it is that we're able to use fire and keep it in its intended place, and the benefits of fire. Here's our little slip-on engine that we got a small grant in cooperation with somebody else to buy. So this holds like about 300 gallons of water, and it has a hose up here and a pump with high pressure. And then this was an engine that was donated to us. Here is a circle of qualified firefighters at all levels. Some of them, it might be their first burn. Some of them have been working with fire for decades. And this is a cultural burn training exchange where we can burn the larger acres in a safe way, and we conduct it as a training. Here's my sister in fire, Elizabeth, and she is starting us off by sending a prayer with wormwood. Wormwood torches were a traditional way of carrying fire. And then here we have our more updated way. So we typically will start our cultural burns with wormwood torches, and then we use these other more modern, up-to-date torches. So that concludes my presentation, and I am open for questions.
Thank you so much, Margo. Thanks, especially for sharing that, as you say, big dream. It's really powerful to see you dreaming big. We've got quite a few questions. There are a number of questions about what people can do to help support this. So someone asked, what organizations, organizers can I support, research, or follow for information on how to petition the government to respect and incorporate this much needed wisdom in our fire and drought management strategies?
So there are many ways to support cultural burning and purposeful burning of all kinds. And that is when you see legislation coming out to write letters in support of it, especially when it has to do with expanding the rights of Native people to exercise their right to burn, or money is being directed towards prescribed burns, those kinds of things. It's always helpful for them to get letters of support. And, you know, it depends on what your skills and interests are, how you might be able to be supportive. And so we have people who come and they're interested in doing videos, or they're interested in doing podcasts, or some of them are artists and they're wanting to do graphic novels. And so there's, you know, just all of these different kinds of artistic ways that people are utilizing to further the movement. I think one of the biggest things that we really need to press forward on educating people is the choose your smoke, you know, that we need to have prescribed burns or cultural burns if we want to reduce the spread and intensity of wildfires. Because, you know, some people, they get tired of you know, breathing smoke, and by the time the end of the wildfire season, they don't want any more smoke. But it's that after the burn season's done, when people are ready to do some healthy burning, that's when we need it, because that's going to be the prevention. And so any kind of support written in terms of to the air quality people, because, you know, they're put in a tight spot too. They're put in charge of how much smoke we're allowed to put up into the air, and they're getting pressure from businesses, or they're getting pressure from grape growers about how much smoke there is. But they need support in saying, yes, permit more prescribed burns. And then, of course, financial help is always welcome. And if anybody feels so driven, they can donate to the Cultural Fire Management Council. We are a 501c3 organization, and so any donations are tax deductible.
And we'll put that link in chat so that it's easy for people to access that. There's a question that kind of follows along with that. I think you said choose your smoke. And there is someone who's wondering if you could share some success stories that you've had in terms of getting your neighbors, the neighbors of land, to accept small amounts of smoke to avoid the you know, much larger smoke that can come from out of control wildfires.
Well, we're actually, yeah, we're really, really fortunate. We live in a really, really rural area, and everybody wants their land burned. Nobody cares about the smoke because they don't want to live in a tinder box. And so we, you know, have a big list of people that are saying, burn my place, burn my place. Nobody's saying we don't want the smoke. They're all saying we want you to burn, we want to burn. But like I said, this is a really rural area. There's like one store in a 40-mile stretch. And that's just like a small store and a gas station. But our neighbors, our Karuk neighbors, they have some wine growers. They have some grape growers up there that used to really complain about the smoke. And but with over time and with, you know, getting to know and understand each other, I think they kind of compromised where the grape growers got some kind of grapes that had a shorter growing season or something. I'm not sure. I think they should target the market as smoked grape wine.
Smoked grape wine. Well, there should be a market for that now.
Grape wine. Right. You know how when they make whiskey, they put them in the smoked whiskey barrels.
Yeah, you're working on a whole new world there of wine.
Throw it out there, maybe somebody will pick it up.
I'll try some. There are some questions about the role of controlled burning with thinning, given the years of fire suppression. What do you see as that? Do we need both? What's the potential trajectory there of controlled burning versus thinning, or working in combination with thinning?
Yeah, I think that it's a good idea to have both, because, you know, a lot of times when you're walking by these forests that have been replanted, you ever notice how close those trees are? They're like 1 or 2 feet apart, and it's just like thick. And so it only makes sense to go in there and cut a bunch of those so that they'll be spaced out. And then the ones that are left will get big and healthy, and they won't be as prone to fire spread because they're not as close together. And so I think that thinning is good if you do it properly. You don't want to go in and clear cut saying, well, you thinned, you know, thinned this one place out of a whole big area, but you took all the number of trees you're supposed to take out of one place. So like true thinning, you know, where you're making the forest more healthy. The one thing that a lot of people do is that they have this impression that you need to cut all the brush inside the area that you're going to burn, and then they put it into piles, and that's not really healthy. I mean, if that's the only way to do it, at least you are, you know, reducing the brush. But what happens with those burn piles is they sit in one place for a really long time, burning really hot, and they kill the soil underneath. So instead of all those benefits that you would normally get from what we call a broadcast burn, you get none of those benefits. And it is not any safer to do a pile burn than a broadcast burn. In fact, there are some that say a broadcast burn is actually safer. Of course, others say just the opposite. So, you know,
Yes.
it is not any safer, and it does not have the benefits of a broadcast burn. We actually do very little inside the unit treatment on the areas that we burn. We cut a fire line around it, like 10 feet wide, cut all the brush, scrape it down to the dirt like a foot wide. And then pretty much the only inside work that we do is if it's so brushy, the people carrying the torch can't walk through it, our crew will cut trails across so that the lighters can get in there to light.
That's some really thick brush. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question. There are so many thank yous and gratitude in the chat. I'll share that, or in the questions, I'll share those with you later as well. But someone shares their gratitude and says, this is such a great talk. And fire management is often a male-dominated field in official institutions and beyond. How do you navigate this to make sure that Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people and the specific knowledge they carry are not neglected? Is it difficult? The family-led bird program seems great for that. It's probably particularly difficult to understand for non-Indigenous agencies.
Yeah, well, I guess growing up in the country, we're all kind of tomboyish. And so it never really occurred to me to think about these gender, you know, differences and how many women are in fire or what. For us, the two of the, well, I'm the executive director, so the highest position in our organization is filled by myself as a female. And we have 2 females on our our board of directors, and we also have some females on our full-time crew and our part-time crew. So for our organization, if you work hard, are willing to work hard and show up every day, then we want you. We don't care what sexual orientation or gender you are. And when we have our bigger events, I've since becoming more aware of trying to, you know, making that extra effort to be more inclusive of females, because this just kind of just, you know, it's just happened the way that's how it is. So we're always making sure, I don't know if you could say making sure, but we always have a good number of females on the crew when we have our training exchange as well. So, you know, I don't know about making it all, you know, making differences on a bigger scale, and kind of primarily focused here on our homelands and what we do. But we're certainly not biased in any way to any kind of gender.
Thank you for that.
Or
Thank you so much for joining us, and for working through the technical glitches this evening with so much grace. We really appreciate it, and we're deeply grateful for the work that you're doing and for being part of the series. So I think there are many people who are saying thank you, and I wish that I could speak for all of them. So please join me in whatever way you can and say good night. And we will see you next week on Tuesday evening at the same time. So thank you, Margo.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.